The classroom was a tomb after hours, its silence thick as dust. April sat alone at a desk scarred with initials, her pencil tracing idle loops in her notebook. The rain outside tapped the windows like fingers testing a locked door. She was used to being forgotten. Detention was just another hour of invisibility. Then it came a low, trembling bark, sharp as a blade slicing through the floorboards beneath her. Her pencil froze. The sound wasn't pipes, not the groan of the old school settling. It was a live, desperate clawing up from somewhere deep. April's breath caught her eyes darting to the empty room. The bark faded, swallowed by the rain's whisper, but it lingered in her chest like a heartbeat not her own. She leaned closer to the floor, waiting, afraid to believe what she'd heard. The school's corridors stretched like veins in a dying body, their peeling paint and flickering fluorescence pulsing with neglect. April slipped out of detention, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, drawn to the sound that wasn't there anymore. The air smelled of damp chalk and rust, the kind that clung to your skin. She paused by a rusted grate near the janitor's closet, its bars caked with grime, and crouched low. The rain outside roared now, a gray curtain sealing the world away. Beneath the grate, the darkness seemed to breathe heavy and watchful. A faint scratch claws on concrete echoed up, followed by another bark softer like a plea swallowed by distance. April's fingers brushed the grate cold, biting her skin. The school wasn't just old. It was hiding something, and it wanted her to know. April's mind was a storm trapped in a bottle swirling with questions that no one ever answered. She pressed her ear to the grate, the cold metal biting into her cheek, but the bark didn't return. Was it real, or just the wind playing tricks, like the times she'd imagined her dad coming back from wherever he'd vanished to years ago? At 11, she knew better than to trust her hopes. They always crumbled like the school's flaky walls. But this sound felt different, a thread pulling at the edges of her loneliness. In class, she was the girl who asked too many whys, earning eye rolls from teachers and snickers from kids. Hargrove called her distracted, but really she was starving for something true. Her thoughts raced. Pipes didn't bark, animals didn't hide in schools. What if it was hurt trapped? The idea gnawed at her, mirroring the emptiness she carried since Mom started working doubles, leaving dinners cold and conversations shorter. April pulled out her notebook, sketching the grate's outline, arrows pointing downward into unknown depths. Her heart hammered, not with fear, but with a spark she hadn't felt in ages. If she ignored it, who would listen? She couldn't be invisible forever. April lingered by the grate longer than she should, the hallway lights buzzing like angry bees overhead. The rain outside softened to a murmur, but inside the silence pressed heavy. Then a scratch, faint, deliberate, rose from below, followed by a low growl that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't anger, it was exhaustion, a warning wrapped in plea. She whispered, "Hey, are you okay down there?" Her voice echoed, strangely swallowed by the dark. For a moment, nothing. Then eyes glinted in the shadows far below, two amber flickers watching her. April's breath hitched. Something was listening, alive and aware. She backed away slowly, but the connection lingered, a silent promise pulling her back tomorrow. April's world had always been a puzzle with missing pieces, each one a question mark etched into her days. Flashbacks flickered like old film reels summers ago, before Dad left in a haze of arguments and slammed doors. She'd explored the woods behind their house, uncovering bird nests and forgotten streams, her curiosity a bright flame. Mom called her my little detective, laughing as April pieced together stories from clues in the dirt. But that was before the silence settled in heavy as fog, after Dad's truck vanished down the road for good. Now at 11, April wandered alone, her backpack stuffed with mystery novels borrowed from the library, tales of hidden treasures and secret doors that made her feel less like a shadow in her own life. The barking from below the school grate pulled at those old threads, a mystery that felt personal, like a message scrawled just for her. She lay awake that night, rain drumming on the roof like impatient fingers, her mind mapping the school's layout in the dark. What if this was her chance to matter, to uncover something real? Peers at school whispered she was weird, always staring off. But they didn't see the hunger in her, the need to prove she wasn't just the kid with the absent dad and the overworked mom. Mom worked late shifts at the diner, coming home smelling of grease and exhaustion, too tired for April's endless questions. "Not now, sweetie," she'd say, eyes distant. April hugged her knees, the bark echoing in her memory, a low rumble that matched the ache in her chest. This sound wasn't imaginary. It was a call urging her forward. For the first time in years, she felt seen, even if only by whatever lurked in the dark. Her resolve hardened like clay in the sun. She'd return tomorrow, flashlight in hand, ready to chase the truth no one else believed. School days blurred into a monotonous fog for April, each one a mirror reflecting her fading presence. She slid into her seat at the back of the classroom, notebook open, but mind elsewhere, the teacher's voice droning like a distant radio. Hargrove patrolled the halls with his sharp eyes and clipped steps, barking orders that made kids straighten, but left April shrinking further. "Pay attention, Miss Thompson." He'd snap, but she heard the bark from below, instead a secret rhythm pulsing through the floor. Lunch was solitary, perched on the edge of the playground bench, watching clusters of laughing kids while she sketched floor plans, arrows to the great notes on locked doors. The routine was armor arrive early, avoid eye contact, slip away unnoticed. It kept the hurt at bay, the sting of whispers about her spacey ways. But the sound cracked that shell, injecting urgency into her numbness. After school, she lingered by the basement door, heart thudding as Hargrove's shadow passed his keys, jingling like chains. Risk gnawed at her detention again, or worse, dismissal as a liar. Yet the pull was stronger, a whisper in her blood, urging her to defy the invisibility that cloaked her life. In the suffocating gloom of the bomb shelter, Echo paced the cracked concrete, his once sleek German Shepherd frame now a shadow of sinew and scars. The air down here was stale, laced with the metallic tang of rust and the faint rot of forgotten things a prison forged during the Cold War's fevered dreams. Echo had been a bomb detection dog, trained in the sharp commands of handlers who smelled of sweat and urgency, sniffing out explosives in mock drills, his nose a weapon, his loyalty unbreakable. But that loyalty shattered one stormy night decades ago during a botched emergency protocol at the school, then a designated fallout shelter. The sirens wailed as the drill spiraled into chaos, panicking officials, flickering lights, and Echo's handler, a young Hargrove, fresh-faced and ambitious, bolting the hatch shut in haste, leaving the dog behind to guard the supplies. "Stay, boy." Hargrove had barked, his voice trembling before vanishing into the night. The drill ended, but no one returned. Days blurred into years. Echo survived on rainwater seeping through fissures like reluctant mercy, and rats that skittered in the dark, their squeaks a twisted companionship. His coat, once glossy black and tan, hung matted and dull, ribs pressing against skin like bars of his cage. A faint limp haunted his right foreleg, a remnant of a desperate leap against the unyielding hatchbone grinding in silent agony. Betrayal etched deep into his eyes, amber pools that once sparkled with purpose, now dulled by mistrust, flinching at shadows that mocked his vigilance. He barked sporadically, a hollow echo bouncing off walls, not for rescue anymore, but out of instinct, a fading signal from a soul clinging to survival. April and Echo existed in parallel voids, two souls adrift in seas of silence, their pains echoing like distant thunder. Upstairs, April sketched invisible maps in her notebook, her curiosity a quiet rebellion against the world's indifference, much like Echo's pacing below, tracing endless circles in the dust, his instincts a tether to a life long lost. Both carried scars unseen. April's from a father's absence, a hole that swallowed her questions whole, leaving her to wander hallways alone. Echo's from a handler's betrayal, a wound that turned trust into a ghost haunting his growls. Their routines were mirrors, April's mechanical shuffle through school days, avoiding eyes that never truly saw her, paralleled Echo's vigilant scans of the dark ears pricked for sounds that promised nothing but more emptiness. In moments of stillness, April stared at ceilings cracked like old promises, her mind replaying whispers of why, while Echo lay against cold walls, his breath shallow, replaying the clang of abandonment. Yet in their isolation, a subtle recognition brewed. April's whispers to the grate, soft and probing, met Echo's tilted head, his amber eyes flickering with a spark long dimmed. Their healing would unfold in tandem, small gestures bridging the divide like April's doodled arrows pointing down, mirroring Echo's tentative steps toward the light filtering through cracks. Nonverbal cues wove their bond: a held breath, a paused sketch, a softened growl. Mutual vulnerability became their language, each seeing in the other a reflection of their own fractured spirit, slowly mending through quiet presence, turning emptiness into the first fragile steps of shared recovery. The storm hit like a beast, unleashed rain lashing the school's windows in furious sheets, thunder rumbling through the bones of the building. April sneaked back after hours, her heart a drumbeat echoing the chaos outside, drawn inexorably to the grate near the basement door. Water pooled on the linoleum, seeping from cracks she hadn't noticed before, turning the floor into a treacherous mirror. The barking erupted, then frantic raw, laced with a desperation that clawed at her insides. It wasn't the distant plea anymore. It was a cry drowning in the roar, sharp barks fracturing into whines as if something below fought for air. April's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the grate, now slick with runoff bubbles rising from below like gasps. Her breath fogged the air, cold seeping up from the depths, carrying the scent of wet earth and decay. Visual shock hit her like lightning through the bars. Amber eyes locked on hers, wide with terror. A dark shape thrashing in rising water. The urgency coiled in her chest. Wait too long, and whatever was down there would vanish forever, swallowed by the flood. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking dust from the ceiling, and April's hands trembled on the grate, the storm's fury mirroring the chaos in her soul. April froze her fingers, gripping the grate's edge, the cold metal, a stark reminder of the line she teetered on. Logic screamed in her mind. This wasn't her problem. Sneaking around could mean expulsion, Hargrove's wrath, or worse, Mom's disappointed sigh over another foolish adventure. What if it was dangerous down there, a rabid animal or a collapsing tunnel? The barking pierced her thoughts, a whine twisting into her heart, pulling at the threads of empathy she tried to bury. Fear of caring gnawed deeper. Opening up meant risking hurt, like the times she'd reached out to friends, only to be laughed away, or hoped for Dad's return just to face empty evenings. But the eyes below, glinting in her flashlight's beam, held a mirror to her own loneliness, a silent plea that whispered, "You're not alone in this." A subtle sign shifted it. All the shape below paused its thrashing, pressing closer to the grate, a low rumble not of threat, but surrender. Compassion surged over logic, drowning the doubts. How could she walk away now? Her mindset cracked resolve, hardening like ice in the storm's chill. April's hands shook as she wedged a loose board from the wall, using it as a makeshift lever against the grate's rusted bolts. Rain pounded above water, trickling down her neck like icy fingers, but she pushed on, grunting with effort. The metal groaned in protest, one bolt popping free with a sharp clang that echoed like a gunshot in the empty hall. Below, the barking turned to frantic whines, the shape now visible as a sodden German shepherd pacing in agitation, his paws splashing in the rising flood. April's flashlight slipped clattering into the dark, but she didn't stop. She pried harder, muscles burning, until the grate gave way with a screech, swinging open like a reluctant jaw. She lowered herself awkwardly, feet dangling, before finding a slippery rung on a hidden ladder, her sneakers skidding as she descended into the musty void. The dog Echo, she decided in that chaotic moment, backed away, growling low, his hackles raised, but his eyes held a flicker of something beyond fear. April extended a trembling hand, palm up, whispering, "It's okay, I'm here," her voice cracking. The rescue was no heroic sweep. It was clumsy, soaked her knees scraping concrete as she reached for him. But it was real, a bridge forged in the storm's fury. April's descent into the shelter was a plunge into shadows thick as tar, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and forgotten fear. Echo circled warily, his limp pronounced on the uneven floor water lapping at his belly, as he eyed her with a mix of suspicion and fragile hope. She rummaged in her backpack, impulsively pulling out a soggy sandwich from lunch, unwrapping it with fumbling fingers and tossing pieces toward him, messy crumbs scattering like confetti in the gloom. He sniffed, hesitated, then snatched one, his jaws snapping with caution, but he didn't retreat. April sat against the wall, giving him space, her clothes clinging cold and wet, whispering nonsense stories from her books to fill the silence. Hours blurred. The storm raged above, but down here a shift occurred. Echo edged closer, his growls fading to soft huffs until he lay a few feet away, exhausted but present. She reached out slowly, her hand brushing his matted fur, and he stiffened but allowed it a silent promise blooming in the dark. The act sealed them, impulsive as her decision, irreversible as the open hatch above their bond, a tentative flame against the encroaching chill. The shelter's chill clung to the air like a shroud, shadows dancing faintly from April's flashlight propped against the wall. Echo huddled in the far corner, his body a tense coil of fur and muscle-amber eyes fixed on her with unblinking wariness. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not aggressive, but a barrier, a warning etched in the scars crisscrossing his muzzle. April sat cross-legged on the damp floor, respecting the invisible line between them, her backpack a makeshift pillow as she avoided sudden moves. Silence stretched thick and unbroken, save for the distant drip of water echoing like forgotten tears. Echo's guarded looks pierced her flashes of mistrust that mirrored her own hesitance, the fear of reaching out only to be pushed away. She didn't speak, didn't approach. Instead, she left a handful of trail mix scattered midway, retreating to her spot. He watched, unmoving, his breath visible in the cold, a sentinel in his own prison. Days blurred in this ritual. April arriving after school, sitting quietly, Echo growling softly before lapsing into silence, their presences coexisting like ghosts in the gloom. Neither initiated. It was a dance of distance, building invisible bridges through patience alone, the air heavy with the promise of what might come if trust dared to stir. April's fingers trembled as she unwrapped a bandage from her backpack, the shelter's dim light revealing a fresh gash on Echo's paw crusted with dirt and old blood. He lay still, watching from his corner, his body language a silent testament to endured agony, flinched muscles, shallow breaths mirroring her own hidden hurts from scraped knees and bruised spirits. She inched closer, not touching yet, offering a piece of jerky torn from her lunch, placing it gently midway. Echo's nose twitched, amber eyes locking on hers, a shared vulnerability hanging in the air like mist. He dragged himself forward, limp pronounced, and sniffed the food before taking it delicately, his growl absent for the first time. April whispered encouragements, her voice a soft thread in the dark, as she dabbed antiseptic on the wound from afar, respecting his space. Pain echoed between them, his physical scars from years of survival, hers emotional from isolation. Both wounds unspoken, but felt in the quiet. He allowed her nearer, eating slowly as she worked their suffering, a bridge mirrored in tentative glances and shared stillness. The moment deepened their connection, silent presence weaving empathy, Echo's wary observation, softening into something almost grateful. April's hand brushed against a rusted tin cup in the shelter's debris, the metal cool and pitted like forgotten skin, sending a shiver through her as she offered it filled with water to Echo. He paused, his amber eyes narrowing the gesture, pulling at threads of memory buried deep. In a flash, Echo's mind reeled back harsh lights of the training yard, the clang of a similar cup dropped by Hargrove during the drill, water spilling like blood as commands barked sharp and unrelenting. "Detect!" The voice had thundered, Echo's nose pressing to the ground, heart pounding with purpose, but the cup's fall signaled chaos. The hatch slamming shut, abandonment echoing in the dark. Now April's soft placement of the cup, no clatter. Just a gentle thud stirred something different. He inched forward, lapping tentatively, his tongue rasping against the tin. April watched her own thoughts fracturing, a broken mug at home, shards scattering when Mom dropped it after a long shift, the sound cracking open April's silence, urging her to hug her mother, despite the distance between them. The parallel hit her like a whisper, small breaks leading to men's. Echo's bark, then low and not warning but acknowledging, tied the moment. He no longer recoiled, pausing instead, his tail giving a faint twitch. April hummed a tune from her mystery books, the notes floating like dust motes, and Echo lay down closer, accepting the water fully. The gesture wove their past together, emotional threads tightening without a word. Flashbacks fading into presence, building a bridge over the chasm of their pains. The shelter's perpetual chill began to thaw, not from any external heat, but from the subtle glow kindling between April and Echo, like embers stirring in a long, cold hearth. April arrived one afternoon with a frayed blanket pilfered from home, its wool scratchy but warm, spreading it out like an invitation on the concrete floor. Echo eyed it from his corner, his breath visible in the dim light, body tense as always, but curiosity flickered in his gaze, a spark amid the shadows. She sat on one edge, leaving plenty of space, and pulled out a rubber ball from her backpack, rolling it gently toward him, not pushing, just offering. The ball bounced once, twice, its soft thud echoing like a heartbeat awakening. Echo's ears perked, a remnant of his detection days when toys mimicked targets, and he nosed it tentatively, pawing it back with a limp that seemed less burdensome. April's laugh escaped then, light and unexpected, bubbling up from her chest like sunlight piercing clouds, the first real joy she'd felt since Dad left, a sound that filled the space with warmth. Echo tilted his head, his tail thumping once, twice, a rhythm matching her mirth, and he rolled onto his side, exposing his belly in a gesture of budding trust. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his fur, soft despite the mats, and he didn't flinch. Instead, he sighed a deep release that mirrored her own easing tension. The air shifted, carrying the faint scent of damp earth, mixed with the blanket's musty comfort, turning the tomb-like shelter into something almost safe. April shared her apple, slicing it with a pocket knife, offering pieces on her palm. Echo took them delicately, his muzzle warm against her skin, the act a quiet communion. Laughter echoed again as he nudged the ball harder, chasing it in a clumsy circle, his barks playful now, not haunted. Safety bloomed in small waves, her shoulders relaxing his guard, lowering the space between them, shrinking. For the first time, the dark felt less oppressive, warmed by their shared spark, a fragile light promising more than survival, perhaps healing wrapped in the simple joy of being seen. The shelter's dim confines felt less like a cage, and more like a cocoon as the days wove their quiet magic. But it was Echo who shattered the remaining barriers in a moment, as unexpected as a dawn after endless night. April sat against the wall, her knees drawn up, sketching faint outlines of the school above in her notebook, the pencil scratch the only sound beside their synchronized breaths. Echo had been resting across the room, his body a loose curl on the blanket, amber eyes half-lidded in wary repose. Then, without prelude, he stirred his ears, twitching at some internal call, and rose with a deliberate grace, his limp barely a whisper on the concrete. April froze, her pencil hovering as he patted closer each step, a tentative vow, his muzzle low but not submissive, his gaze locked on hers with an intensity that pierced her core. He paused, inches away, the warmth of his breath brushing her hand like a secret shared, and then in a surrender that stole her air. He leaned in, resting his heavy head on her knee. The weight was profound, not just physical, but laden with years of solitude, melting away his fur coarse, yet yielding under her tentative fingers. Tears welled in April's eyes, hot and unbidden, spilling over as she stroked his ears, feeling the scars beneath like maps of battles fought alone. The fragile peace in the shelter began to fracture like thin ice underfoot, subtle at first, as if the past were a ghost stirring in the corners. Echo, who had grown accustomed to April's presence, suddenly stiffened during one of her visits, his ears flattening against his skull, a low growl vibrating through his chest like distant thunder. He paced erratically, his limp more pronounced eyes darting to shadows that danced mockingly from her flashlight's beam, barking sharply at nothing, or so it seemed. April's heart quickened, the air thickening with unspoken tension. She whispered reassurances, but Echo's posture remained alert. Hackles raised, his primal instincts awakening like a dormant fire. Up above, the school hummed with its usual rhythm, but down here the environment shifted, drips from cracks sounding louder, more ominous, echoing like footsteps approaching. Echo's barks grew insistent, not playful, but laced with warning. His body language a tapestry of unease, tail-low muscles coiled as if sensing a threat long before it materialized. April felt it too, a chill, unrelated to the damp, her own nightmares, flickering dreams of locked doors and vanishing figures, mirroring Echo's restless vigil. The signals built gradually, a subtle crescendo of tension that foreshadowed the storm. Echo's alertness, a harbinger of echoes from a buried trauma clawing their way back. The tension in the shelter ignited like dry tinder under a spark when Hargrove's voice boomed from above, muffled but unmistakable, calling out for stragglers in the basement halls. Echo's body went rigid, a primal snarl ripping from his throat, his lips curling back to reveal yellowed teeth as he lunged toward the ladder, protective fury blazing in his eyes. April's heart slammed against her ribs, panic flooding her as she grabbed at his collar, makeshift from an old belt, whispering frantic pleas. Echo, no, stay. But the dog's aggression rooted deep in trauma, a maternal-like instinct to shield what was now his pack, his barks escalating into a thunderous roar that shook the walls. Flashbacks assaulted Echo, the drill's chaos. Hargrove's young face twisted in fear as he slammed the hatch, the scent of betrayal mingling with gunpowder and sweat from his detection days. He recognized the voice instantly, the abuser's timbre triggering a storm pause, scraping concrete body trembling with rage. April shouted, then her voice cracking with emotion, "Stop! He'll hear us!" Tears streamed down her face, a mix of fear and empathy as she pulled him back, her small frame straining against his power. Echo withdrew suddenly, panting heavily, retreating to the corner, with a whine, his eyes-haunted body curling tight in withdrawal. The explosion left them both drained, April collapsing against the wall, sobs racking her as the past's violence resurfaced, revealing glimpses of Echo's abuse, the abandonment that scarred him deeper than any wound. Their bond strained, but held the shared panic, forging a deeper recognition. Echo's protective snarl, a testament to his loyalty reborn. The echo of the confrontation lingered in the shelter like smoke after a fire thick and acrid, as Hargrove retreated up the ladder, his footsteps fading into the school's hollow halls. Echo paced restlessly at first, his growls tapering to uneasy whines, body tense, as he glanced toward the hatch, but gradually he slowed exhaustion, pulling him to the blanket's edge. April sat apart, knees hugged to her chest, tears drying on her cheeks in the dim light, the physical separation a necessary breath after the storm. Her against one wall, him against the other, silence wrapping them like a bandage. Regret washed over her in waves. Had she pushed too far, exposed them both. Echo's eyes met hers across the space, amber depths, holding a quiet apology, his tail thumping once faintly a bridge over the gap. As the minutes stretched, trust reaffirmed itself in subtle shifts. He edged closer, not touching, but near enough for his warmth to reach her, a silent promise whispered in shared breaths. She reached out tentatively, her hand hovering, and he leaned in, resting his head nearby, the contact, a vow of safety forged in the fire. The past's shadow receded slightly, closure, seeping in like light through cracks, their bond anchored deeper in mutual protection, the separation dissolving into unity. The school's underbelly hummed with an unnatural quiet after Hargrove's retreat, but the air thickened like gathering storm clouds, subtle signs of danger weaving through the shadows. April felt at first a prickle on her neck as she gathered her things. Echo's ears perking sharply, his low growl vibrating the floor like a distant rumble. Footsteps echoed faintly above, deliberate and stalking, not the casual shuffle of a janitor, but measured, predatory, circling the basement door like a shark in murky water. Echo's body language shifted to high-alert hackles, rising nose-twitching at scents carried on drafts, old sweat authority betrayal, his instincts a finely tuned alarm blaring silently. April's flashlight caught glints off the hatch, but something blocked the light briefly, a shadow passing chased by the creak of floorboards overhead. Animal behavior amplified the unease, Echo pacing with purpose, tail low and stiff barking once at the void, his eyes locked on invisible threats. Watchfulness consumed them. April's breaths shallow, peering into corners where dust motes swirled unnaturally as if disturbed by unseen movement. The tension coiled tighter, Hargrove's presence implied in every creak, every pause building to an inevitable confrontation. The shelter no longer a haven but a trap snapping shut. The shelter's air turned electric, charged with the ghost of old wounds, when Hargrove's silhouette appeared at the hatch again, his voice a sharp intrusion, slicing through the quiet. Echo's reaction was instantaneous, a deep guttural snarl that built into a frenzied bark, his body launching forward like a coiled spring, released protective aggression flaring as he positioned himself between April and the intruder. Panic surged through April, her shouts echoing off the walls. "Echo, no, stop!" Her voice raw with fear, hands grasping at his fur to pull him back, but the dog's trauma-fueled rage overwhelmed, rooted in the betrayal of that long-ago drill. Hargrove's descent into the shelter was a descent into reckoning, his flashlight beam trembling as it caught Echo's snarling form, the principal's face twisting in horror at the sight of the ghost he'd buried. "You. How?" he muttered. But Echo lunged a primal force of fur and fury, knocking Hargrove off balance in a chaotic tangle. April's cry piercing the air as she dove forward, her arm accidentally clipping the ladder, sending the flashlight clattering into darkness. The standoff ignited. Echo pinned Hargrove against the wall teeth, inches from throat growls vibrating like thunder, the dog's eyes blazing with recognition of his abandoner. Hargrove lost control, his composure shattering into pleas. "I didn't mean to leave you." Tears streaming as flashbacks assaulted him the Cold War. Drill's panic sirens blaring, his young hands slamming the hatch on the loyal dog to hide the protocol's failure career over conscience. April scrambled between them, her hands on Echo's heaving sides, whispering frantic calm, the physical tension coiling like a wire about to snap Hargrove's knee, buckling under the weight, Echo's jaws parting wider. The confrontation was raw emotional layers, peeling back Hargrove's confession, spilling out in gasps. Hargrove's retreating footsteps faded like a dying echo, leaving the shelter steeped in a silence that pressed heavy on April's chest, regret coiling in her gut like smoke. She slid down the wall knees, weak, staring at the hatch, now shadowed, and still whispering to herself, "What have I done?" Echo paced, at first his breath's ragged body a taut wire of leftover adrenaline, but he slowed, casting glances her way before retreating to the opposite corner, curling tight with his back to her, a physical separation that mirrored the emotional chasm reopening. The air hung thick, unbroken by words, only the drip of water marking time like tears unshed. The shelter's sanctuary curdled into a trap, subtle omens creeping in like fog through cracks, building a tension that prickled April's skin. Echo sensed it first, his ears swiveling toward the hatch, a low whine escaping as he rose, body rigid, nose flaring at invisible scents wafting down leather shoes. Stale coffee authority laced with fear. The hatch creaked open to a world blurred by rain. April emerging first, her legs unsteady on the slick floor above Echo, close behind his paws, tentative on the linoleum that gleamed like a false promise. The school hallway stretched empty fluorescent lights humming softly, casting long shadows that seemed to reach back toward the dark they'd escaped. A janitor's shout echoed down the corridor. "Hey, kid, what the?" And soon teachers swarmed, faces etched with confusion and concern, wrapping April in a scratchy wool blanket that smelled of mothballs and dust. Home felt like a new world under the soft glow of kitchen lights. April's mom fussing with bowls of warm soup that steamed the air with hints of broth and herbs, her eyes wide with a mix of scolding and relief. Echo padded in cautiously, his nails clicking on the wooden floor like tentative heartbeats, nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents. Clean laundry, faint lavender from a candle, the absence of damp decay. April knelt, her hands gentle, as she offered a bowl of kibble mixed with scraps, watching as he approached slowly, their eyes meeting in a gaze that held volumes, his amber depths softening from wariness to gratitude, hers reflecting the mirror of his healing. He ate from her hand, first rough tongue, brushing her palm, a small gesture that sent warmth spreading through her like sunlight filtering through leaves. Days unfolded in quiet rhythms, mornings with brushes combing through his matted fur knots, giving way under steady strokes, Echo leaning into the touch, his breaths syncing with hers in a dance of recovery. Sensory details wove their bond tighter, the soft bristle against skin, the faint musk of his coat mingling with shampoo's clean scent, the way his tail thumped softly on the rug during shared silences. April sat on the porch, Echo following closely, his head on her lap, as they watched rain taper to mist. Glances exchanged, hers curious still, his loyal now mirroring the emotional mending. The field behind April's house stretched golden under the fading autumn sun, leaves crunching softly like whispers of the past as she and Echo stepped out together, no leash binding them, just the invisible thread of their bond. Echo's limp had faded to a mere echo of his trials, his stride matching hers in a rhythmic harmony side by side, his shoulder brushing her leg in quiet affirmation. She called his name softly, Echo, and he turned, amber eyes locking with hers, bright and unshadowed, responding with a tilt of his head that released something deep within her, a breath held too long, finally exhaled. Their motions intertwined, her hand dropping to his fur fingers, weaving through it gently, his tail wagging in slow arcs, breaths sinking like a shared pulse. The school loomed distant on the horizon, a fading silhouette symbolizing the burial of secrets and the rebirth from darkness. Trust-complete fear dissolved in this intimate walk, a powerful emblem of their mutual healing.